Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I wanted to talk about moonlighting, which is something that we're really talking about the resident here. And I think that while I've talked a lot about getting into residency, I haven't done as good a job at actually talking about what residents need to do and kind of some of the limitations that they have. For some of you, this is going to be a little bit of a surprise. And for some of you, this is going to be something you've been kind of doing all your life. So let's start with what moonlighting is. So as defined by ASHP, it's a voluntary compensated work performed outside the organization or within the organization where the resident is in training and or at any of its related participating sites. These are compensated hours beyond the resident's salary and not part of the scheduled duty periods of the residency program. So your ability to moonlight really depends a heck of a lot on what your staffing requirements are. That is, how much are you supposed to work for the residency, and then are you able to do things outside of that residency? Now, I go back to way back when I was a pharmacy student, and because we were the first all PharmD class, we actually had contact still with bachelor's pharmacy students. And I'm not talking about Bachelor of Pharmaceutical Sciences, an undergraduate degree that you get now as a way of kind of getting a degree before you get the PharmD. But it was the actual degree. So that was it. You were done. You did 2 years of undergrad, whether at a community college or a 4-year school. And then you did 3 years of pharmacy school, not year round, but the regular, it was a regular 5-year bachelor's degree. It was kind of similar to what architecture students do, where they have 5 years because it's just so much extra in there that it just doesn't fit into a 4-year degree. And what those students were doing, the PharmD students, was they would work on the weekends at local retails. I think it was Rite Aid that the ones that we were in contact with were working at. And so that was kind of what moonlighting is like. When we talk about residency, though, it's really going to be how much can you handle and whether or not it's a good idea to do it. So some of the academic medical centers especially have what I feel are the most brutal possible staffing hours that you can have, which are basically 12 on, 2 off, where you work every single day, including your staffing, and then you have a weekend off. And I'll show you where the actual guidelines for that are. There's a reason that it works out to be that, because that's the edge of what someone can do. But basically, moonlighting is your residency doesn't pay you enough to get through or get by, and you need to do some other things. And I'll talk a little bit about why you may or may not want to, continue to do. All right, so as you kind of look at this document, I feel like I would be terror and horror filled as I'm looking at some of these other definitions, which are continuous duty, which is the assigned duty period without a break for strategic napping or resting. And then strategic napping is short sleep periods taken as a component of fatigue management, which can mitigate the adverse effects of sleep loss. Basically saying we know that there are times when you're going to be working 16s or even up to a 24, and you need to sleep so that you don't make mistakes, so that you can get through there. And these are very much in line with what physicians do in their residency. So when you talk about duty hours, though, this does not include reading or studying or preparing for presentations or journal clubs or even travel to and from conferences. Nothing that are hours not scheduled by the residency program director or a preceptor. And again, that's the definition of moonlighting. So let's kind of get down to the maximum hours, which again are in some ways horrific, I think, to my senses as someone who has children and a life outside of work that is amazingly fulfilling and amazingly flexible. And that may not be the case with your year. And I understand. I'm seeing kind of the Reddit boards talking about burnout in PGY1, PGY2. And really, I think that when we look at the PGY1s and we were to ask them, what is it that made you not go on to a PGY2? I think this kind of burnout would definitely be kind of top of mind there. So let's look at section number 2, which is the maximum hours of work per week and duty-free times. So duty hours must be limited to 80 hours per week, averaged over a 4-week period, inclusive of all in-house call activities and all moonlighting. So when you talk about that, that means that if you're going to do moonlighting, you can't exceed this 80 hours per week. So if you have a particularly difficult stretch where you're going to be doing so many hours, and you say, well, I need to make some money and moonlight, it may not be allowed by the program just because of the hour rule. But 80 hours per week is a lot. Usually when I hear about residents, I'm hearing closer to the 60 rather than the 80. The other thing that you really want to kind of consider is you have to have some way to make sure that the patients are going to be safe and that you can handle such a thing. And that's really a person-to-person thing. I don't see why I would be able to handle 80 hours a week. I just don't see that. I did work 77 hours on 1 week off the next week as an overnight pharmacist in community pharmacy. But that's a very different thing than going around the hospital, talking to others, those types of things, because each time, I would get my 11 hours where I would work at night, and then I would actually meet other night pharmacists for breakfast, which was kind of cool, and we made it quick because we wanted to get to bed. And then we went to sleep, and then we got up, and it was a little bit tough. And really, that second day is the toughest if you're going on one of these stretches. But then we had an entire week off. And yes, we picked up shifts for other stores and things like that. But it was a very different thing where you're like, okay, yeah, I'll pick 8 hours over here. I know the store. I know it's maybe a store without a drive-through. It just wasn't that difficult. But this kind of thing not only wreaks havoc on your body, but wreaks havoc on your relationship. So if you are in a relationship and you're thinking, I need to make more money, then I don't know that this is necessarily the best way to do it. I get it that some areas of the country are extremely expensive now. Rents, for example, in Arizona have gone up 30% where I own a home. And I know that the cost of actually buying a home has gone way up. Although the rates were down, now they're creeping back up. And they're still at historic lows, but it's still expensive to either own a home or to rent a home. And I get that you're thinking, okay, well, I just gotta work a couple extra hours and then I can make up that difference. But again, the moonlighting thing, I just feel like it is absolutely just going into burnout. But just to let you know, there is a document that you can go to. And what I'll do is I'll put this this may sound strange, but I'm going to put it in the pre-residency audio academy under the free documents that you can kind of reach, just so it's really readily accessible to you, so you can see it. And maybe I'll just put in, maybe what I'll do is I'll just put in a link to that in the academy so that it's just a little bit easier to kind of handle. Next thing I want to kind of talk about is what could you do instead? Okay. And I wrote a book called Finding Your Unicorn Job for Pharmacists, Financial Freedom, Flexible Hours, and Personal Fulfillment Beyond the Pharmacy Counter. And if you've never had an Audible book before, they do allow you that kind of first book free, but you would have to cancel before those 30 days. Otherwise, it ends up being $14.95 a month. So, being completely transparent, You would have to listen to it in the first month and then just kind of cancel things if that's something you didn't want to do. But interestingly enough, Mike Lenz, who is the narrator, actually, I don't think you get a contract with them, but has one of the big publishing houses hire him quite a bit. So his full-time job now is audiobook narration. Now, he's got a really cool story. He was actually the mayor of his town. And just so you know, those types of things don't actually pay a ton. I know that an Iowa representative, this is not mayor, but this is a representative, makes like $25,000 a year. And then the Senate president, I think, makes $35,000 a year. So these people have jobs and businesses, and this is an additional thing that they do for the state. But what I wanted to go through was the fact that when you have to work more hours than your traditional job, I always recommend that other job be something outside of it. So while I work as a college professor, my outside of work income comes from other things that I do. And yes, I have my undergrad English degree, and I like writing books and doing podcasts and things like that. But what I wanted to do is just kind of go through some of the people that are inside and what they've done. And I'm just going to go through the table of contents, and you can look at the table of contents free. Just go to the Finding Your Unicorn Job for Pharmacists, Financial Freedom, Flexible Hours, and Personal Fulfillment Beyond the Pharmacy Counter. And you can kind of go in and talk a little bit or see a little bit about some people that are doing some interesting things. Mike Corvino, who has Core Consult RX in South Carolina, he actually didn't do a residency, but ended up earning his board certification. And that might seem like that's really hard to do, and it is. But he did all that extra work. Same thing with MedEd 101's Eric Christensen. He is actually probably one of the best teachers of residency, board certification, but didn't need to do one. And the way that I look at these two guys who didn't do residency, and I am not disparaging them in any way, I'm actually doing the opposite, which is it's harder to get board certification without residency than it is with residency. And so that takes an amazing amount of kind of self-discipline and those types of things. So when you talk about, getting those clinical skills and those types of things, they had to find jobs that allowed them to do that without the residency, and then kind of moved on. And this is something that's going to become more popular as we see the number of people actually going through residency decline, and that has declined quite a bit. Myself, I have memorizingpharm.com, which has a number of links to pharmacology resources and things like that. Pharmacy Joe is a critical care pharmacist, and he has pharmacyjoe.com and also has the podcast that he does. And then tldrpharmacy.com. Although Brandon Dyson is an oncology pharmacist and now I believe is in administration, he also just really, really kind of dug into the clinical and shares it as well. So we're really 5 people with podcasts and platforms, I guess you would say. And some of our money comes from things that we publish and things that we write, cheat sheets with TLDR. Pharmacy Joe's written a book. I've written, I think, 30 books. MedEd 101, really well known for his courses. And then Mike Corvino also has really cool podcast as well. When we get to what it is that pharmacists are pretty good at with flexible hours, I find that it kind of comes down to 2 big things. Either they're helping others with business or career, or they're in kind of a business or career thing, or it's financial. So we're talking about real estate and we're talking about financial planning. And the big thing that you really want to kind of think about is what is that group that I want to help, and I want to help them outside of pharmacy, and how do I want to monetize that? So when I talk about BT Pharmacy Consulting, we're talking about Blair Thielemeyer and the Thielemeyer is hard to spell and pronounce, so it became BT Pharmacy Consulting. When you're talking about, that kind of flexible thing, Mike Lenz's narration can happen any time of the day. And so when you're talking about finding an opportunity, it doesn't just have to be narration for audiobooks. There is also educational narration and writing and things like that. Pharmacist Moms Group, Pharmacist Dads Group, Pharmacy Leaders Podcast, which has become the Pharmacy Residency Podcast. ResidencyHelp.com has become residency.teachable.com, so some things I need to update. Pharmacy Inspection is compounding. Pharmacy Podcast is Todd Urey, and really just kind of the grand poobah of podcasting in the pharmacy space, and having your own podcast. And I think that he's really done a good job with things like sponsorships and things like that, something I really haven't kind of leaned into. Pharmacy Advisory, we're talking about Hillary Blackburn in Nashville. RX Ashley, I think she's still out in California. I haven't talked to her in a while. Fit Pharmacist was able to leave his community position, Adam Martin. Non-traditional pharmacist out of Michigan, there's actually 3 of them. Brian Fung, I know, went on to get an MPH, and that's something that I can talk about in a later episode. What kind of degrees are you thinking about? And then, Paul Tran has given a lot of advice to pre-pharmacy students for a long time, but it's also very good about investing. And that's, I think he had 3 or 4 jobs at one time. And what the idea behind that was that rather than burn out with a single job and just kind of working overtime, to have these other jobs that kind of provide fulfillment, some opportunities to talk to other people, and just kind of talking to other people about those things. Real Estate RPH, I'm going to be talking to Nate Hedrick here in, I want to say Friday. I'll be interviewing him for the Pharmacy Residency Podcast. I think I'm going to go on his show as well. Student Loan Planner, it's a guy in Travis who I think moved to North Carolina from St. Louis, and he helps people with their student loans. And then your financial pharmacist, Tim Ulbrich, is the CEO of that. Tim Baker's also as well. I think they're all in Ohio now. So also updating that one. But just to let you know that what you're really looking for, especially in this space, is there a job that I can do at home remotely and make some money, but also learn something? I think that you're really, really asking for burnout if you're going to do something like Moonlighting. But I think that it's easier to kind of just listen to these guys and just hear their stories and just see what resonates with you. So again, the Kindle is $10. The audiobook, it's, you can listen to it for free, but also you can listen to it on the way to and on the way back from residency. So it's kind of a way to get inspired about something that you're going to do in addition to residency, but also another skill, because once you do become a clinical pharmacist, it's counterintuitive, but you actually burn out from patient care. And that's, I want to say, almost half of physicians are really in that situation where they are doing this patient care day after day, have a certain amount of time, and if they're going to be a good practitioner, they have to bring their work home, and those types of things. So finding your unicorn job for pharmacists, financial freedom, flexible hours, personal fulfillment beyond the pharmacy counter, I think that's just a really, really great way to kind of dig into that type of thing. And as I'm kind of going through this, I really feel like I should have kind of a postgraduate residency course where I'm talking about these things and really, really helping you as you're kind of going through your PGY1 and on to PGY2. So maybe that is something that I will do soon. But we're getting on the 20-minute mark, so I'll just kind of hold it there. I know that's where your commute tends to end. So again, when you're talking about moonlighting, just to sum up, I think that some of your residencies, it will simply be not allowed. Some of your residencies, it will be impossible because you will be too exhausted to keep patients safe as you're doing it. But I think that it actually is a lot better to kind of start thinking about something that is not pharmacy related, that may not pay as much, but that's going to bring you a lot more satisfaction and actually re-energize you. And you'll still make a couple bucks, but I think that is a much better way to go. Again, if you need my help, residency.teachable.com or tonythepharmacist@gmail.com.